Hello, y'all. I'm Jen, and this is
Jay.
And together we push play. So today we are doing another reaction to one of Mr. Ballen's videos titled U.S. Marines Witness Paranormal Event in Afghanistan. We got the request to do this video in our comments section down in one of our videos. I really wanted to do this video because for those of you who don't know, I am a veteran and I did serve on active duty in the Marine Corps. This definitely piqued my interest. But if you want to see this video uninterrupted, go to Mr. Ballen's channel, watch it, and then come back over here and watch our reactions. Let's get started.
The paranormal does not really have a place in the military. Despite what anybody tells you, it's just not something that gets discussed. Now, I was a bit of an anomaly. I was in the Navy for 7 years. 5 of those years were spent on a SEAL team, and maybe because we were in such small teams, people had to put up with my weirdness and my interest.
That's awesome. That's badass. Good job, Mr. Ballen. That's awesome. The SEAL team, like, that explains a lot, honestly. Now that I'm thinking about it, that explains a lot. Thank you for your service, Mr. Ballen, and anybody out there watching us that serve, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And, the strange happenings around the world. But, really that was an anomaly. And I think it comes from the culture inside the military where you have a group of people that has such a intense job that's so rooted on practical approaches to problem solving. There is no time to be theorizing about how demons and ghosts and things that are out of this world are having an impact, because we need to focus on what's happening right now in front of us. There's no space for anything else. And so when you do hear stories coming out of the military that are paranormal in nature, it isn't that you should inherently believe them, but rather you should understand that if they have come to the conclusion that this is paranormal, they have ruled out virtually everything else. And so today I'm going to share a military paranormal story that happened in Afghanistan in 2009 when 8 U.S. Marines were stationed at this very isolated observation. It isn't that you should inherently believe them, but rather you should understand that if they have come to the conclusion that this is paranormal, they have ruled out virtually everything else. And so today I'm going to share a military paranormal story that happened in Afghanistan in 2009 when 8 U.S. Marines were stationed at this very isolated observation post in the middle of Helmand province. And some very strange things happened out there that the Marines that were there believe are still plaguing them to this day. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, I would encourage you to play Ding Dong Ditch on the like button's house, and then also subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. In June of 2009, U.S. and NATO forces surged into Afghanistan. Troop numbers escalated dramatically in preparation for this massive offensive against the Taliban. During this surge, a very small team of Marines, 8 Marines, were given a mission to go to an observation post in Helmand province where a group of British soldiers were stationed at the time. An observation post, or OP as it's called in the military, is any location where you're able to observe. Hence the name. Most OPs, if not all OPs, are located on high ground because that provides you the best view. OPs are very strategically valuable. You have the higher ground and you can see what's going on around you. And so as a result, OPs become prime targets for attack. Now, the OP that these Marines were going to, OP Rock, was a little bit unique. It was strategically very important, but it didn't really have the higher ground. All around it were other large pieces of terrain, which meant if you poke your head up for too long, you might get shot from a sniper on the mountain. And so OP Rock was like a very dangerous and isolated place to be. Not to mention laughably small and had almost no amenities. It was basically...
That's why they sent the Marines. Yeah.
We had a couple of HESCO barriers, those big brown squares that get filled with sand and dirt to stop bullets, And then, not even cots. They slept literally on the ground on sleeping pads and a couple of ghillie tents overhead. That was about it. And so these Marines were going to be there for 60 days, where they were not going to be able to go anywhere. They were just isolated and stuck on this tiny little wasteland in the middle of Afghanistan. The 8 Marines were led by Sergeant Green, and his second in command was Corporal Lena. The other 6 junior Marines were Zolik, Hoyt, Wilson, Parker, Smith, and Gibbs. After driving their up-armored vehicles all the way through the snaking pass, they get to OP Rock, and the British soldiers are there anxiously waiting for them. Normally, anytime you turn over with any other unit, you do something called turnover operations, where because you're new to the area, you want to go out and do like a presence patrol or something to get a feel for the area with the people who have been there, to kind of give you a lay of the land and say, hey, look out this area, we think there's IEDs over there. Remember, if you're over here, you're in plain sight of the enemy, they can shoot you. But when they got there, the British were so anxious to leave, they did not do turnover ops. The British just looked totally weathered and beaten down and ragged, like they'd been fighting at OP Rock for decades.
They're scared to death.
Yeah, that's like red flags right there, because, yeah, like, it's real big to do those kind of, like, perimeter checks and things and, like, that turnover. It's real important to have that done, really. But it's crazy that they didn't do that. Like, that's kind of... But, Marines over-adapt. They overcome and adapt. So, I'm sure they figured it out. Okay, let's go.
They'd only been there for 60 days, the same amount of time that these Marines are about to be there. And before they leave, one of the British soldiers turns and says, hey, just so you know, if you dig anything up here, just put it back. And the Marines look at him like, what are you talking about? And he doesn't elaborate. He just says again, if you dig anything up, just put it back. Trust me. So that night, the men have settled into their new home for the next 60 days. And
I ain't digging then.
That is strange that they would tell him that. Like, if you dig anything up, just make sure you put it back.
Just dig around it. Go to the next spot and start digging again.
But kind of like that reverse psychology. Well, now we want you to dig stuff up.
Yeah, just imagine
because now your curiosity is gonna like spike through the roof. That's crazy. Okay, that is one of the weirdest things that I think I've heard is somebody telling them, if you dig anything up, put it back.
Yeah, because you never know what those people are practicing. They put something in the ground and then you pull it out, or like say you're digging in and then you move that, it curses you to pull. Ooh, no.
Yeah, this is a little crazy. Okay, let's go.
And the way it works on any base in the world, but certainly in a war zone, is there's always someone manning a guard post. And so the first night, it happened to be Corporal Lena's turn to be on watch. Corporal Lena is the second in command of these 8 Marines. And he was up in the guard tower, and you got to put yourself in his mind, okay? Even if you've never been to Afghanistan, just imagine being out in the middle of nowhere, like in the middle of a mountainous desert with no village, no people, no anything. But at the same time, you are hanging it out there. You are totally exposed. There are people in the mountains around you that want to kill you, for sure. And it's you and 7 other sleeping people right in your little tiny OP. All you got is a radio where you can call back to your main base that's far enough away that if something bad happened, you better hope that 1, you can get through to them, and 2, they can get over here as quickly as they can. And the great fear when you're in these remote locations is that you're going to get ambushed. There's so many stories about these complex attacks being launched on these small little outposts where all of a sudden groups like these 8 Marines just get totally overrun by the Taliban. So it's a terrifying thing. When I was in Afghanistan, I didn't stand all that much guard duty, but when I did, you're up in the shack and you're kind of looking out into this like vast expanse of kind of nothingness. And you're wondering, like, are people watching me right now? Is someone taking aim at me right now? I mean, you're protected and you're doing all the things you're supposed to do, but nighttime in Afghanistan, standing guard duty, it's very eerie. And so this first night, Lena is up there, it's very quiet, and his radio that's right next to him, like imagine like a big walkie-talkie, right, military grade radio, it starts crackling. Military radios, at least American military radios, are from the 1950s, and they've basically not changed. They're very durable.
That's funny, because I was actually like a communication specialist, and so that's what I did. I did comms, like radios, all that stuff. And yeah, the equipment, a lot of it is so outdated. But they're working on, yeah, most definitely. It gets the job done.
That's what matters.
But I totally agree with what he's saying right now. Yeah. So they're working on upgrading a lot of it, and I'd be curious to see what they're working with nowadays. Now that I'm not in, but I don't know.
Shit, probably.
Let's go. And another quick thing before we get back to it. Comms are like your lifeline out there. If you don't have comms, you have nothing. You have no way to call air support. You have no way to call medics. You have no way to do anything. You can't. If you can't communicate, shoot, and move, you're like in water without any. I don't know. It's bad.
Water without a boat.
Yeah, it's bad. So comms are definitely like a major part of deployment or any kind of operation really with the military. Comms are huge.
And they work. But it's not uncommon for them to falter, and that's why we have people that specialize in just radios that can fix these things for us. Because if you lose your line of communication, you're screwed. And so he's sitting there and he starts hearing crackling on the radio. And so he notices it, but he doesn't think much of it. And the crackling stops, and he's looking out into the mountainside, and he's kind of looking around, and just doing his typical guard duty. Then the crackling picks up again, and he thinks he can hear someone speaking in the radio. It didn't sound like English. It didn't sound like even words necessarily, but it was a little bit louder. Now he's really paying attention to it. Because he was worried his radio might be going bad, he first took the battery off, looked at it, blew it off, reconnected the battery, rebooted it, and put it back down. And he's a little more keyed into his radio. And then a couple minutes later, he hears this crackling, and now he can clearly hear someone's voice. And it sounds like Russian. He thinks someone is speaking in Russian. This is an encrypted radio. You're not picking up random signals all over the place. You only are picking up people that have your crypto. And it doesn't make any sense to pick up somebody else's voice. This has to be someone on your team. And so he thinks, okay, I'll check in with the main base, because my guys are all asleep right here. They're all sleeping right there, 7 of them. There's no beds. They're laying on the ground right there. I can count them. No one's on the radio. So he picks up the radio and he calls into the main base and he says, hey, is anybody pushing traffic out this way to OP Rock? And like right away, they get a response from the main base that says, no, we're not pushing or receiving traffic. Lena's not terrified about this, but he's like, okay, there's something going on with the radio. The crackling and gurgling and weird sounds would persist throughout the night, to the point where the next morning when the next guard came on duty, he said, hey, I think there's something strange going on with the radio. You should probably go switch it out and get somebody else's radio while you're up here. Lena's relieved of guard duty, and he goes down to check on the other Marines. And at this point, everybody's awake, and it's the start of their first full day at OP Rock. And because they have nothing else to do besides defend it, they start taking stock of how well fortified is it, what are some ways that we can improve this place. And they notice that there's a trench dug around the inside of OP Rock, basically right up against the Heskos, that allows anyone to stand and not be jutting out of the OP and run the risk of getting shot by a sniper. And they're looking at it and they're thinking to themselves, it's not deep enough. It's maybe a couple feet down. You're certainly not going to be able to stand on this trench. You'll totally be exposed. And they thought, why didn't the British, who were here for 60 days, why didn't they dig a deeper trench? And so Lena and the rest of the Marines decide they're going to spend that day digging the trench a little bit deeper and a little bit wider. As they're
Don't dig.
If you dig anything up, put it back. They were warned. But at the same time, like, it sounds like a good idea because you don't want to be exposed to the enemy. Like, dig that trench. Let's get that stuff done. I don't know. Let's see what happens.
digging, Lena hits something metal in the trench. And he pulls it out, and it's like this metal stake, like an engineering stake. and he brushes off the dirt on the stake, and he's looking at it, and he can see some foreign writing, and it looks like Russian writing. And he's thinking to himself, oh, that's not that weird. Back in the 80s, the Russians were here, and it's totally possible that they may have left some of their gear here and it got buried. About 10 meters away from Lena is one of the younger Marines named Wilson, who's digging, and at some point he hits the ground and like a pocket in the soil opens up. And he sees there's some pottery and some pieces of what look like ceramics that are inside of this hole. And after pulling out some of the plates and pots, they pull out a huge human bone, a femur, your leg bone. They ultimately decide to tuck the leg bone back into where it was, and they stop digging in that area, and they continue to dig in the other sections of the trench. But they couldn't dig more than a couple inches before running into more human remains. And by the end of the day, they had unearthed dozens of skeletons inside of this trench. And so they realized that this is probably what the British meant when they said, if you dig something up, put it back. A couple of weeks go by, and the Marine...
That's crazy.
Mass grave from back when. What was it?
Something. I would be creeped out if I was like digging up soil over there in Iraq. Well, they were in Afghanistan, but I was in Iraq, and like just ew. Like that's just creepy.
Marines at this point have accepted that they live in a very creepy place. And on day 13 of being at OP Rock, Hoyt, who had just turned 20 years old, is up on guard duty. As he's sitting there, he starts getting this really uncomfortable feeling that someone is right behind him. And so at one point, he turns around to look at what's behind him, basically looking back into the camp itself. And now, coming from outside the wire where he had just been looking, he hears this horrible, blood-curdling scream. He turns around and he's looking out. He's got his night vision goggles on. He's looking around for anything. And all of a sudden, a couple hundred meters away, he sees a man running between one bush to another bush. Now, they know that at any time they could get attacked. So they're...
Real quick, for any of you guys who don't know what outside the wire is, when you're inside the wire, that is like the protected place that's already cleared, and like that's your safe area. Outside the wire is not safe. That is where the enemy's at. That's where the danger's at. That's where everything's at. So when you hear somebody talking about something outside the wire, that's scary. I just want to mention that for those who might not know what outside the wire means.
Ain't
But
none
anyways.
of it safe, bro.
But anyways.
They're not thinking that this could be anything other than the Taliban coming to attack them. And so the other Marines have jumped up because they heard the scream, and they're looking to Hoyt to be like, what's going on? Hoyt is saying to them, I got a guy, he's about 200 meters away. I just saw him running right to left. Lena runs over to the edge of the HESCO, and he raises his rifle with a thermal imager on it, and he's looking out, and there's no heat signature out there. It's totally cold. There's no animals, there's no people, certainly, there's nothing. And Lena is yelling to Hoyt, where is he? Where do I need to look? And Hoyt's saying, he's right there. I just saw him go behind that bush. But Lena is looking out, and he can't see anything on thermal. And he's like, I don't see anything. There's no one out there. The Marine...
That's scary. Especially when, like, one person sees this, and they're trying to communicate it, and the other person's like, look, I'm not seeing what you're seeing. It's scary because you start to get like goosebumps at that point because, right. You know, and I don't know if it was maybe they were at different levels, because usually the guard shacks and stuff out there, like when you're taking up posts and you're watching, normally you're up higher than your fellow Marines.
Marines also had a dog that they inherited from the British soldiers that had been there. Her name was Ugly Betty. They loved Ugly Betty, they took care of her, and she was apparently really good at identifying when people were coming towards the OP, so she was a great watchdog. And this whole time, she had been looking in the same direction that Hoyt had seen this figure, and she is barking like a maniac. And even after they're looking with thermal and they can't see anyone out there, they can't get Betty to calm down. She's completely transfixed on the area where Hoyt had seen this figure. So for the rest of the night, the Marines are totally on guard, anticipating at any moment that they're going to get attacked. Someone's going to take a shot, they're going to throw a grenade in, because we lost this guy who was right there in front of us. So eventually, the next day, when they didn't get attacked, they just kind of said, okay, and they moved on and just figured it was an anomaly. Another couple of weeks later, on day 26, Zolik, who's another one of the younger Marines, was on guard duty, and it was really hot. He remembers even taking his helmet off because he was sweating so bad. And then at some point, while he's just looking out into the vast open nothingness, he said that the temperature dropped inside of the shack dramatically. So much so that he actually felt cold. There was no breeze, there was no reason for it to be getting cold. And as he's thinking to himself, like, is there a storm coming in or a cold front coming in? He starts feeling like someone's standing behind him. And he keeps looking over his shoulder and no one's there. He's in this tiny little shack. And he's feeling creeped out, and all of a sudden he starts hearing whispering from behind him. Not on the radio, but like in the shack with him. And he
Coaster.
Wow, rightfully so. Like your body, you pick up on when it's getting colder and when you feel someone behind you. Like you've got great intuitions naturally, just being a human being. But oh my gosh, like that's and then they start
creepy.
hearing whispers that are not coming through the radio. Yes, most definitely creepy. I totally agree. Okay.
keeps turning around and he keeps thinking, like, am I hearing things? Am I losing my mind? And he starts hearing footsteps on the roof of his shack. And that's when he thinks, oh,
hell no.
Oh, yeah. Hell no. 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 Did Betty get up out of the dog?
No,
Is that what they called her? I don't remember her name, but did she jump up there? Is she walking around? Yeah, I would be going through like every logical reason for why this could be happening in my mind. Like it. Wow. Okay, so he's hearing footsteps.
Smith, who was the kind of class clown of the group, is playing a joke on me. He must be whispering outside. I bet he climbed up on top and he's screwing with me. So he jumps out of the shack and looks up, expecting to see Smith standing on the roof of the guard shack. But no one's on the guard shack. At this point, Zolik's pretty spooked. He does a quick search on either side of the guard shack, thinking maybe Smith is there, but no one's there. And then he turns around and, of course, sees that the other 7 Marines are all asleep. So it wasn't Smith. It wasn't any of his teammates. At this point, he goes back in the shack and he raises his rifle and he's looking through his thermal scope. So any human would light up like a Christmas tree if you saw them on a thermal. And he's scanning outside all around, thinking, did I hear someone who's out there? Because they had that weird run-in 2 weeks earlier with that random person that they could never find. He's thinking maybe there's somebody else out here. And as he's scanning, he sees a man standing a couple hundred meters away with his fists raised like this. Zolik was so caught off guard from the way he was standing that he actually lowered his rifle to look because the moon was pretty bright. The illumination was pretty good. And he looked, he couldn't really see him again, so he brought his rifle back up, and now through his thermal, the figure was gone. Zolik in interviews has admitted that he was really stressed out about being at OP Rock. He was really down. I think of all the Marines there, he was depressed. He did not want to be there. He felt like he was experiencing real combat fatigue. And he thought at this moment that he's losing his mind. Between the whispering and the footsteps on the roof and seeing this person with his fist raised. And so instead of telling people that he had potentially just seen this person out along the perimeter of their OP, he started to convince himself that you're just losing your mind. You're stressed and you're hallucinating. You just got to calm down. For the rest...
Yeah, I could see that happening. And plus, too, like you're so close to the people you deploy with. Like, they're like your brothers and sisters. Like, you're so close to everyone. But yeah, I know how crazy it is, you know, when you see something or you want to report something, but you don't want your buddies to think that you're crazy for witnessing what you witnessed.
Yeah.
Let's go.
The rest of the night, he would not see the figure on his thermal or anybody out there, but he would hear whispering behind him. He kept hearing footsteps on the roof, but he would go out and no one would be there. So by the time the sun came up, he really thought that he was kind of losing his mind. And so he went to his leadership, Sergeant Green and Corporal Lena, and he told them about what had happened the night before, about, you know, seeing the figure that had disappeared and hearing these whispers and the footsteps. I mean, he really thought that he was losing it, and he requested to be transferred. And they granted it to him. And the other 7 Marines were really upset about that. They felt like he was kind of abandoning them, and they were really critical of the...
Yeah, your buddies are really critical of you when you do stuff like that. Like, yeah, you really think, was dude just trying to get out of it? Was, you know, why would he ditch us like that? Like, why, you know, you ask yourself a lot of questions, but yeah, you just don't do that to your buddies. You just don't do that, especially in the Marine Corps. Like, you stick it out to the end. It's kind of crazy that after one night of that, he requested a transfer. That is kind of insane. So I could see, yeah, I totally understand that. You just don't do that.
The reason for him leaving, they're like, oh, you're just playing the crazy card. You're just making that up so you can leave this crappy place that we don't want to be here either. So they were not taking seriously what he claimed happened. They just believed he was using the crazy card to get out of being an OP rock. Just a couple of days after Zolik's departure, Lena is on guard duty in that guard shack, and as he's looking out, Ugly Betty starts barking really aggressively towards the area that Lena is looking at. And so he raises his night vision goggles and he's scanning the mountainside looking for any sign of people that perhaps Ugly Betty has sensed. And he stops when he sees what he believes is a Taliban scout standing on the mountainside, who's pretty far away, a few hundred meters away, and he switches to his thermal scope to confirm that it's a person before he engages. And when he raises his thermal scope, there's nobody there. There's no heat signature anywhere. But Ugly Betty is still barking like a maniac in the direction of where this potential scout was standing. And so Lena goes back to his night vision goggles like a second later, and he's looking, and he sees the same scout now about 100 meters closer to him, way closer to him. Like impossible to cover that distance in that amount of time. He practically falls over when he sees it. He switches to his thermal and he's getting ready to engage, but there's nothing there. And this is all happening in a matter of seconds. He goes back to his NVGs and he's looking and there's nothing there. And as he's about to go to his thermal for one last look, he feels a tap on his shoulder, which he believes is going to be one of the other Marines that must have heard him frantically moving around in the guard shack. And when he turns, there's no one there. There's no one anywhere near the shack. Nope. All seven are asleep.
Nope. Mm-mm.
Oh man, okay, yeah, that would have gave me chills down to my core, you guys. Like, you're seeing this person, they're in one spot, you lose track of them, they're in the next spot, and then the next thing you know, you're feeling a tap on your shoulder, thinking it's one of your buddies, and you turn around and no one's there. Oh.
I think they found me on the coast somewhere trying to swim back home and something happened to me like that.
That is crazy. Okay.
In the middle of the camp. At this point, Lena felt bad because he was critical of Zolik, who had left because he had heard voices and seen apparitions out in the distance. And here's Lena, the second in command of the group, having the exact same experience. But over the next 10 days, Hoyt, Smith, and Wilson would all have very similar experiences in that guard shack. And after a while, they all began sharing their stories, and they all realized that Zolik probably wasn't lying, and we were unfair to be critical of him because we've all experienced this now. Then on day 59, the day before they're scheduled to leave, all of their radios go dead. All of them. And Lena goes...
There you go, I told you, ghosts are real.
That's scary. When your comms go down, that right there is probably scarier than what they were witnessing out there. Because your comms, that is your lifeline, you guys. Like, that is... When your comms go down, that is... All hell breaks loose at that point. Because, yeah, stuff is crazy. Okay, the second in command, he's something.
Goes over to Gibbs, who was their comms guy, and he's like, what's going on? And Gibbs was like, I've been working on the radios this whole time we're here. I've changed nothing. They've always worked. Now, they did have a satellite phone, but it was an unreliable way to get in touch with reinforcements if you really needed it. They're pretty much isolated at this point, and they're all just sitting there, just hoping they can get through one more night without any problems. Wilson is the one actually in the guard shack, and then all of a sudden, machine gun fire opens up right outside of their base. And Wilson is totally caught off guard. He has no idea where it's coming from. He's trying to call it out to the guys where they're getting shot from. And all the other Marines are scrambling to the walls. They're taking cover behind the Hescos. And as they're laying there, Lena runs up into the guard shack with Wilson. He's like, he grabs him and he's like, where are they shooting us from? And Wilson's like, I have no idea. And it's like, it's so loud. There's all this gunfire coming in at them. And as Lena and Wilson are trying to figure out where this is coming from, they hear the distinctive sound of an RPG being fired at them. It's a rocket-propelled grenade. It's like a whistling sound, and they know it's going to hit them at any moment. The two of them break.
Yeah, that whistling sound, you will never, if you ever hear it in person, it's one of those sounds you will never forget in your entire life. And trust me when I say that, You will never, ever forget that sound. It is one of the most scariest sounds ever. And you remember the very first time you hear that sound, too. You'll never forget that the rest of your life. They're ducking down. Okay.
Brace for impact, and they hear the sound of this RPG smashing inside of the OP, and the machine gun fire is just continuing. It's a non-stop. And so a couple of the other younger Marines basically low-crawled their way into the trench where they were protected from these rounds, and they're thinking, like, we got to make sure no one's in the trenches. And so they start clearing the trenches, but no one's in the trench. And it's just this constant barrage of gunfire. They have no idea where it's coming from. And then just as suddenly as it started, the gunfire stops and it's silent. As soon as the shooting stopped, the Marines did not just poke their head up and say everything's fine now. If you're being shot at, you assume that even if there's a break in the gunfire, they're going to start shooting at you again. And so for hours, they're just like waiting for the next round of fire to start, but they don't even know where it's coming from. And they're kind of isolated and exposed. So they're all just kind of like hunkered down against the Hescos waiting to respond to the next volley of fire. But it never comes. And when the sun comes up, they're able to take stock of the damage to their OP from all the machine gun fire and from the rocket-propelled grenade. But there's no damage. No one had ever been shooting at the OP. There was no damage. So they had no explanation for it. So when
So what was it, like a old Soviet battle going on still out there or something, like they call it a reoccurring thing? A
I
residual
don't know,
haunting or
but
something?
yeah, like, that's crazy. Like, if they really thought they all really thought they were taking incoming rounds, and they did what they did for it, and they were all hearing this at the same time, like, that to me is just insane.
I guess my question would be is, did they find any, like, actual, like, anywhere where any, like, mortars or anything or any kind of gunfire actually hit structure or anything like that? Has there been any damage created?
Yeah, he just said that no damage, they couldn't find any damage from the incoming rounds or mortars or anything, the RPGs or whatever, you know, like, that's just insane.
reinforcements arrived, they just wanted to pack their stuff up and get the heck out of there, and they did. After leaving OP Rock, very shortly after, Smith, Parker, and Diggs, 3 of the 8 Marines that were there, were all killed in Afghanistan in separate instances. And then Sergeant Green, who was their leader, was very badly injured in an IED blast. Lena believes that when they were digging out those trenches and finding all those bones, that they unleashed something. It turned out a lot of people had lost their lives on that little strip of rock. When the Russians invaded Afghanistan, they captured OP Rock and killed all of the Mujahideen that were located at OP Rock. Then the Taliban came in and they took back OP Rock from the Russians and killed all the Russians that were at OP Rock. Then Americans came in and took back OP Rock from the Taliban, killing all the Taliban that were there. So you have all these people, probably dozens and dozens of people that at one point have been holding OP Rock, that had all been killed at OP Rock. And so Lena believes that it's only a matter of time before this curse that they unleashed comes back to get him. So I'd love to get your reaction. What do you think happened at OP Rock?
I don't say I'm still
That's crazy. Yeah, because Marines, you know, we keep really good records in the Marine Corps of, like, everything, and that's crazy. And I feel for the families who lost those Marines, you know, out there, and for the Lena who feels like he still has his coming. Like, I feel for you, man. Like, I'll pray for you. I mean, that's crazy, because it was all a shared experience. It's not like 1 or 2 people had this experience. It was a group. It was a whole squad that had this entire experience in the Marine Corps, and that's crazy. It blows my mind.
Once they all actually realized there's something going on, that's when all of them started witnessing stuff together too.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden at the end of it, it was like, so it's like if it was here, you believe in that kind of thing, you're going to think residual haunting and there's something else around there or something.
Yeah, that's crazy. But anyways, you guys, if you are enjoying our reactions, give us a thumbs up. Let us know you're here. Also, you can leave us a comment down below and let us know what you think. Do you think they were haunted, or were they all sharing the same hallucination, or what do you think happened? Let us know down in the comments below. And if you're really enjoying our content, hit that subscribe button if you've not already hit it, and the notification bell so you can be notified every time we put out a new video. And I'm excited. I learned that Mr. Ballen was also in the SEALs. That's badass. I have mad respect for him now. And that's awesome.
I had respect for him before.
Well, yeah, I had a lot of respect for him beforehand, but now that he was in the Navy SEALs, that has a deeper meaning for me, personally, being in the military, the Marine Corps. I also served in the Army Reserves, too, so... yeah, let us know what you think, and let us know how you feel about this video and what your ideas are on how this happened. And we'll keep putting out videos for y'all. Until next time, y'all. Bye. So, and wait, I really. Well, why are you laughing? Like, I'm getting chills just thinking about it because I remember how it was like being.
I could have swore I turned it off.